Who the hell are you to talk about honor? A filthy black woman daring to challenge the police? You make me sick." The words spat out in the empty park as Officer Brian Mitchell glared at the woman before him. He smugly believed he was dominating a weak black woman, an easy prey who couldn't fight back, unaware that she was Selena Williams, Deputy Chief of Police, a woman who would make this story explode and not stay silent when bullied. "And what state do you live in? Who do the police protect there? The people or the powerful?" Wilshire Park became unusually quiet in the late afternoon. The weakening sunlight spread thinly through the tree canopy, casting shadows on the pale tiled pathway. Selena Williams had just left the office after a private meeting regarding complaints about misconduct within the force. She wore simple clothes, a gray shirt, dark jeans, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and an earphone in one ear. She walked slowly toward a bench near the pond, where the network signal was usually stronger. Opening her phone, she logged into her official email and was about to send an encrypted document when a voice sounded behind her, not loud but sharp. "What are you doing here?" Selena looked up. A few steps away stood a white police officer, with a strong build, his right hand resting lightly on his belt, his uniform neat, but his eyes impatient. "Where do you live?" he asked without introducing himself. "Do you have an ID? This is a residential park. Who are you waiting for?" Selena closed her laptop calmly and looked at him. "I'm just resting for a few minutes. Is there a problem?" Brian Mitchell smirked. "The problem is, we received reports of some people acting suspiciously around here." Selena didn't reply. Her eyes remained calm, but her chin lifted slightly. He saw her calmness but misunderstood it as defiance. He stepped closer and looked down at the backpack beside the bench. "What's in there? Can you open it? On what grounds are you demanding this?" Selena asked clearly, not loudly. "That attitude won't help you. I'm just doing my duty," Brian replied, breathing heavier. Selena removed the earphones and closed her phone. She kept her tone steady. "I haven't done anything wrong. I don't see a valid reason for your questions." Brian tilted his head, narrowed his eyes. "You or anyone else need to cooperate, especially in an area that's usually quiet. We were told there are some people who don't belong here." The words rang clearly. No explanation was needed to understand the implication. Selena sat still, but her gaze changed. No longer cautious, it became sharp as a blade, fixed directly on his face. She didn't speak, but her breath slowed. For a moment, the air around thickened. Brian stepped back, as if realizing something too late to take back his words. In the distance, a few pedestrians passed by. Some glanced back, seeing a police officer questioning a black woman, but then they walked on without stopping. In Selena's mind, flashes of memories passed, files thrown into drawers, indifferent nods during hearings, lawsuits with no response. She did not stand or argue. She just looked deeply into Brian's eyes. That look spoke no words but carried a silent declaration of war. Brian frowned and turned away. Unease stirred in him, but he did not know why. Selena pulled out her phone again. Her finger lightly touched the blue encryption icon. The data began to transfer slowly, and in that moment, a silent storm started to form. Selena stayed seated, eyes fixed on the man before her. When Brian demanded her ID, she replied simply, "I'm not obliged to show it without a valid reason." Her answer made him hesitate for a moment, but then he smirked and touched the grip of the gun on his hip, as if that was a reflex in moments of asserting authority. "What do you think you are to speak of honor? A lowly black woman acting up with the police? Disgusting." He spoke with clenched words. "Cooperate or be detained for investigation. This is a waste of time." Selena didn't blink. Her calmness was infuriating to someone like Brian. His eyes betrayed rising irritation. He looked down at her backpack under the bench, then suddenly kicked it hard. A dry sound rang out. The backpack rolled aside, its lock undone, and folders slid onto the ground. Selena bent down and gathered them, slowly and steadily. She picked up each sheet without hurry, flipping pages as if accustomed to reviewing internal files. Brian watched, his gaze scanning a few bold, short lines printed on the paper, but not enough to understand the content. Selina looked up. For the first time since the questioning began, she met his eyes directly. No words, no resistance, just a cold, warning gaze. Not far away, Luis Ramirez, an intern at the city police station, sat with a friend on stone steps. He had seen everything from the start. At first, he thought it was a routine check, but the kick to the backpack startled him. Luis jumped up, reaching for his phone to record, but his friend held him back. "Don't get involved. You know the law." Luis hesitated. He gripped his phone tightly, then lowered it, eyes still fixed on the black woman facing a hostile officer. Near the pond, by the flower beds, an elderly woman in a faded coat watched intently. She drew no attention, sitting beside an old cloth bag, hands resting on her knees. This was Grace. Inside her bag was a small, outdated but still functioning video recorder. Her finger lightly touched the red button. Brian stepped closer, face near Selina's, eyes arrogant. "You should know your place in this city," he said, drawing out each word. Selina stood. A gentle breeze swept through her hair. She adjusted her backpack strap, eyes unflinching, voice calm to the point of ruthlessness. "I will remember every word you said." Brian laughed scornfully and turned away, as if their exchange left no consequence. He had no idea that the eyes that recorded him were not only Selina's. Luis stood at a distance, lips pressed tight. Grace sat silently, eyes locked on the now off recorder. Selina stood alone in the empty park, shoulders straight, stepping slowly toward the exit. In her hand was the phone with an unsent email. Yet in her mind, a decision had been clearly formed. This was not a personal insult. It was the first signal of a greater exposure. She knew exactly where to begin. Luis Ramirez took off the security badge from his shirt, put it into his jacket pocket, then closed the door of the small rental room. The room was situated among a row of rented houses for intern students, its walls mottled gray, with a desk placed right by the window overlooking the parking lot. He sat down on the chair, exhaled slowly, his hands still slightly trembling. In his mind, the images from the park replayed more vividly than his most recent memory of the morning's the way the officer approached, his voice steady yet harsh, eyes sharp with warning, and the sudden jerk of his foot toward the backpack. Luis did not turn on the camera, but his mind recorded every detail, from the nameplate B. Mitchell to the last loaded sentence. He clearly remembered the woman whom the officer questioned. The calmness in her eyes sent chills down Luis's spine. No harsh words, no angry reactions, but that gaze cut straight through the officer's arrogance like a blade. He opened his laptop, logged into the internal internship portal, and navigated to the field notes section. His finger hovered over the title line, "Observation at Wilshire Park. Date XX." But the moment he clicked Create Report, a notification popped up. "Unverified case, submission of unapproved documents is not allowed. Please contact the direct supervisor to confirm the scope of recording." Luis froze momentarily. He had been encouraged to report truthfully during orientation, but this was the first time he saw the system reject content even before he wrote it. He closed the screen, put on his jacket again, and hurried to the second-floor office in the internship area, where Officer Sloan usually sat. The room smelled of cold coffee and old printer ink. Sloan was staring at spreadsheets, tapping rhythmically on a file folder. When Luis knocked and explained briefly, Sloan slowly looked up. "What did you see?" he asked, his tone indifferent. Luis summarized without embellishment, but as soon as he mentioned wanting to file a report, Sloan interrupted. "Forget it. Cases like that happen every day. You're here to learn how to work, not to disrupt the process." He emphasized process, like a cold wall, heavy enough to discourage the young man. Luis stepped back, greeted Elite politely, then walked out into the hallway. The sky had darkened. The parking lot below was becoming deserted. He sat down on the steps, turned on his phone, and opened the Notes app, intending to write down everything he remembered. But his finger paused on the screen. If he recorded it, would he be labeled a troublemaker? If he sent it, would anyone read it? or would it vanish like the words of those who were not trusted? Louise closed the app, stuffed the phone into his pocket, then reopened it. This time, he accessed a private note section and named it Wilshire Park Valid Anonymous. He did not know what he would do with it, but he needed to keep what he had witnessed. Because if someone asked, "Where were you when this happened?" Louise wanted an answer, not to prove anything great, but so he would not have to wonder how long he had been silent. When she returned to her temporary shelter near the edge of the railroad, Grace pulled the door latch and leaned her back against the worn wooden door. This cramped space was where she came back every night, among people named in census lists but absent from all policy decisions. She took off her handbag, sat on an old mattress, and took out a small silver camcorder, a model from a decade ago with its paint peeling off. She opened the lining at the bottom of her bag, pulled out an empty plastic pill bottle, twisted off the cap, took out a memory card, and hid it in her jacket pocket. In Grace's mind, the image of the woman in the park remained vivid. Her upright posture, steady eyes, and voice held back something greater than self-defense. Grace knew that feeling. The feeling of holding on to the dignity of a system once trusted until that system turned its back. She had been an emergency nurse for 12 years in a public health system linked to local police. During one shift, Grace witnessed a police officer stomp hard on the chest of an unconscious patient on a stretcher, simply because the person did not comply properly. She wrote a detailed report, submitted it up the chain with full signatures, believing the truth would be heard. A week later, she received a dismissal notice. The reason in the file read, "Failure to maintain a professional attitude and psychological instability during duty." Her reputation was destroyed. Other hospitals rejected her applications. Former colleagues remained silent. At that time, Grace asked herself, if I had recorded the video, maybe they wouldn't have dared. But that year, she did not have a camera. No one believed her alone. Everything slipped away in silence, as if it never existed. That was why, when she saw the tall officer bending down to threaten the black woman in the park, Grace's hand instinctively opened her bag and turned on the camera. She had no plan, no reason was needed. It was instinct. The instinct of someone who once had a voice, but had it taken away. She inserted the memory card into an old laptop, its screen blurred by a thin layer of dust. The video played back. The image wavered slightly, the sound unclear, but she could hear the last sentence. "I will remember every word you said." She rewound, played it again. Each time, Selena's eyes imprinted deeper in her memory. Not because of defiance, but because of the hidden weight behind the calmness. A weight Grace understood well, having carried it during countless night shifts under fluorescent lights. Grace did not send the video immediately. She did not yet know who the woman was or what she would do, but she wanted to wait to see if the woman had enough strength to stand up on her own, because if she did, Grace would be the second to speak out. And this time, she would not wait for anyone's approval to be believed. Selena sat back at her desk, her coat still on, eyes no longer tired from a long day but tense like a drawn bowstring. The incident at the park lingered in her mind, not just because of the personal insult, but because it exposed something she knew had existed too long. A silent decline within, where power was wielded as legalized violence. She logged into the internal complaint system, entering Brian Mitchell's personnel code. Almost immediately, a data sequence appeared. 11 complaints over 3 years, 7 marked internally resolved, 3 under review, and 1 single line showing an error message. A17R, details not found. Selena frowned and opened the access log. The A17R code remained, but the content was completely blank, as if cut off before it was written. She traced the access history. The last person to open this entry was over 2 years ago, as recorded by the account. She recognized the code. Roy Handley, deputy commander who had once declared the priority to maintain the organization's image over internal disputes. In Selena's mind, layers of censorship became clearer. These incidents were not accidentally overlooked. They were handled by those with the power to put them aside. She opened the backup interface, created a separate export of all Brian Mitchell's access logs, isolated the A17R code, then saved it into an encrypted folder outside the main system, where only she had temporary access. Searching keywords related to A17R, she noticed another gap. No whistleblower name, no incident location, no accompanying report. The only remaining detail was the original timestamp, a cold line stating, "Victim's name unknown." For someone who had processed hundreds of files, Selena knew this emptiness was not a technical error. It was the product of intentional erasure, a form of human invisibility, erasing names, silencing voices, then calling it a closed case. She looked at the A17R code, repeating it in her mind like a hidden password. If someone tried to make this case disappear, it was not Brian Mitchell. He was too crude to cover it up, but well protected enough to survive. The problem was not what he did yesterday. The problem was that he was allowed to do it because this system once erased a victim without leaving a name. Selena reopened her personal secure folder and typed a new note. A 17R reverse investigation. Do not follow the whistleblower. Find who viewed, then deleted. All the data on the screen had been backed up, but what she needed most was no longer there. The name. Just a name. Someone who once existed, then vanished from official records. And if the system left no trace of them, she would start tracing the one who pressed the button to make them disappear. The physical file archive lay deep beneath the administrative building's ground floor, where old yellow lights fell on steel shelves stacked with faded documents. Selena personally opened each drawer, browsing through hundreds of forgotten case files. She told no one about her visit. That was understandable. The digital system could be manipulated, but original paper records, if they remained, would not lie. Among faded files and sparse index sheets, she found a strange folder labeled with a different case code. Flipping through a few pages, her eyes stopped at a faded, creased sheet with a bold code stamped A17R. The report lay misplaced among unrelated files, as if someone temporarily stuffed it there and forgot to retrieve it, or deliberately hid it where no one would think to look. The content was suspiciously brief. Incident between officer and unidentified suspect. No further action required per directive. No officer's name. No victim's name. No specific time. The final approval was signed with initials R.H. Selena held the paper near the light, studying the bottom. A very faint, handwritten line, as if someone had tried to erase it with water. She squinted and read again. The words appeared little by little. Spoke with Roy. Temporarily shelved. In that moment, all the scattered points connected. The empty data in the system was not a software glitch. The absence of whistleblower's name, officer name, timestamp, location, all reflected an act, directed by those with authority, to redefine what an incident. She took her phone, photographing every corner of the report, carefully preserving creases, stains, and even the smudged ink. She opened a scanner, saving both the original image and a PDF in a separately encrypted folder outside the internal network, accessible only via a personal encrypted drive. Another printed copy was placed in a sealed envelope and locked in a drawer. Returning to her desk, Selena no longer saw Brian Mitchell as the main target. He was now a product, not the source. The real person who made the victim in case A17R vanish from the entire system was the one who signed that note, Roy Hanley, deputy commander, once responsible for managing complaint data before promotion. He not only knew but ordered the shelving. Selena opened her notebook and quickly wrote a line. Roy does not need to hide Brian. He is hiding something bigger. Before her, the paper report blurred with time, but what had been shelved would now be uncovered, layer by layer, not by anger, but by evidence. And this time, no one would make a second name disappear. The road leading to Tasha Monroe's house branched off the main route and gradually disappeared among sparse rows of pine trees. Selena drove over patches of gravel, stopping in front of a modest wooden house nestled on a hill. The door was unlocked, but there was the sound of chains rattling inside. When she knocked, a hoarse voice responded, neither inviting nor refusing. "Come in, if you know what you're looking for." Tasha sat beside an old dining table, the light from the window casting a silver-gray sheen over her hair. She did not stand, only glanced over her thin-framed glasses. Her face still held the sharpness of someone once accustomed to facing distorted indictments and evasive testimonies. "I don't talk to the press, nor do I want to be dragged into trendy justice campaigns," Tasha said, before Selena could speak. "I'm not here for the media," Selena replied. "I'm here because of file code A17R and because of Roy Hanley." Tasha squinted. The name just mentioned seemed to brush off the dust covering old memories. A silence stretched between them. Her hand rested on the table, lightly tapping a familiar rhythm on the wood, a rhythm that had echoed through many file analysis sessions. "I thought that case had been burned," she said. "Why are you digging it up?" Selena was silent for a few seconds. "Because it's still in the system, but no one has a name to call it by. And because the person who signed the cancellation confirmation is still sitting in the executive chair." Tasha stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a brown document box. Inside were bundles of files wrapped in plastic, each labeled by hand in faded black ink. She searched for a moment, then took out a thin folder and handed it to Selena. 4 years ago, Tasha began, an African-American boy was arrested for disturbing the peace and placed in a temporary detention cell in Block E. An officer beat him to the point he required inpatient hospitalization. I was on duty that day. Just by looking at the injuries, it was clear it wasn't an accident. She sat down, her voice deepening. I filed the report, included medical signatures, photos, and statements from 2 officers on shift, sent it to the Internal Affairs Command Office. "And then?" Selena asked. "No response." Tasha chuckled bitterly. "I checked the file code. It vanished. When I asked directly, I was summoned into a private room. Roy Hanley was there, looking at me as if I were the one breaking the rules. He told me to consider my career over personal feelings. 3 weeks later, I was transferred and then resigned." Selena opened the folder. At the end of the report was a line confirming the cancellation of processing, a faded seal marked with the initials RH. Tasha poured a glass of water and set it before Selena. "You're not the first to see the system's distortion, but you might be the first tough enough to fix it. The question is, how much are you willing to pay?" Selena did not answer immediately, but in her eyes a fierce light shone, not because of Brian Mitchell, but because too many files had been submitted yet unread, and now one of them had been opened. "How many cases like this are there?" Selena asked, still holding the old folder. Tasha leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the window, blurred by sunlight. She didn't look at Selena, speaking evenly. "I don't remember all the names, but I remember the feeling that your file is being read by people who don't want the truth to move forward. You know that kind of silence? A deliberate silence, signed and sealed." Selena nodded slightly. Tasha stood, walked to a wooden shelf, rummaged through stacks of old documents, and brought out a faded report with a worn spine. She spread it on the table, pointing to the middle section. "This is a preliminary record before cancellation. The victim was a homeless young man, no ID, no family to vouch for him. He was beaten while in custody, lost 3 teeth, suffered a torn tongue, and sustained a skull injury. The original incident code was A17R. Selena leaned close, comparing each sentence to the scanned copy. Although missing names, the details matched almost perfectly with what she had found. The original report had existed but was pushed into darkness in the coldest way, not crossed out, not destroyed, but erased from every official branch of the system. "Roy didn't need to order anyone killed," Tasha continued. "He just needed to decide which files were allowed to exist. No bloodstains left behind, no evidence leaked. Everything was cut from the root. Cases like this usually involve people unable to resist. No lawyers, no relatives, no voice. Or worse, those who spoke up but were labeled as out of control." Selena stared at her. Every sentence Tasha spoke confirmed suspicions she had long harbored. But more importantly, it painted a portrait of Roy Hanley not as a brute, but as someone who wielded the system like a precise scalpel, manipulating by choosing what to keep and what to erase. "Are you willing to help me?" Selina asked. "I am reopening case A17R and possibly others that had disappeared before. I need someone who once knew how the system was built and who was forced out for telling the truth." Tasha did not answer immediately. She was silent, her gaze drifting over the time-darkened wooden table. Then, as if remembering, she stood, went into the inner room, and returned with a thin file carefully wrapped in plastic, placing it in front of Selina. "There are things I kept," she said slowly. "Not out of fear, but because it's not yet time to use them." Selina took it, her eyes fixed on the papers. In that brief moment, between two women twisted by the system in different ways, an unspoken agreement was formed, not by oath, not by contract, but by the tacit understanding of those once pushed aside, yet determined to return and change the operation of a machine thought untouchable. The internal meeting room on the third floor on Monday morning was no different from any previous week, except the atmosphere thickened with every breath. Nearly 20 officers were present, most sitting upright, eyes on the electronic board but minds elsewhere. Selina entered, carrying a full printed report, her coat draped over her elbow, her gaze direct without seeking any greeting. She stepped up to the podium, set down the documents, and spoke firmly. "I need everyone to acknowledge an incident that occurred during working hours, involving official duties and showing signs of serious ethical violations." Roy Hanley nodded slightly, showing no emotion. He remained seated at the head of the table, arms crossed, his expression neutral, as always. Selina began by describing the event at Wilshire Park, presenting it in sequence. The moment of approach, the aggressive behavior, the racist remarks, the use of force against someone showing no signs of wrongdoing, and, most notably, the identity of the targeted individual, herself. The deputy police chief, appointed directly by regional resolution, a few officers looked up when she mentioned her position. The rest kept their eyes on their documents or tapped lightly on the table out of habit. When Selina proposed escalating the case to an independent preliminary investigation, bypassing the internal affairs channels, Roy spoke up. He said, "We have established procedures for handling internal complaints. Creating a precedent of discrimination would be detrimental to the team's morale." Selina looked him straight in the eye. "This case is not a precedent. It is reality. If the system scrutinizes itself without independent oversight, we are only cleaning records, not conducting investigations." No one responded. Roy did not argue further. He nodded and moved on to the next agenda item. The meeting ended like a routine administrative session, with no one voicing support or opposition. However, as Selina exited the room, Brian Mitchell was leaning against the opposite wall. He said nothing, nor did he bow his head. In his gaze there was no fear, only a quiet challenge. The administrative secretary sent a brief notice. "Officer Brian Mitchell will undergo a preliminary investigation within 7 days. His position and data access remain unchanged temporarily." Selina folded the paper. She knew this process well enough to reassure the public, but it was insufficient to expose the cover-up mechanisms. She also understood that what happened after the park was no longer just a story between her and an overstepping officer. It was the opening act of a larger confrontation between those who seek change and a system accustomed to concealment. Returning to her office, a young officer passed by, stopped briefly, and said loud enough for her to hear, "We are not used to being overseen by one of our own." Selina did not reply. She entered her office, locked the door, and opened file A17R on the screen. Beside it lay a copy of the testimony that Tasha had kept, and notes that were added daily. She knew this would not be a simple case of prosecuting wrongdoing. She was digging beneath the surface, where every brick was laid with deliberate silence. When her name appeared alongside the word victim, what shook the room was not her rank, but her existence as a mirror, reflecting the face many in that meeting did not want to see. The next morning, Selena entered her office. Everything was in place. Neatly stacked files, assignment boards on the walls, and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the break room. Yet, small things began to feel off. The assistant on duty gave a nod that missed its usual half-second timing. A colleague who shared the elevator with her that morning walked a step faster, avoiding her eyes. In the hallway, half-finished conversations instantly fell silent as she passed. She said nothing, only observed. Observed as someone trained to analyze psychological crime scenes and now applying that skill within her workplace. Checking the internal email, she found the 3 files she had requested earlier that had been returned. The reason cited was temporary data access interruption due to technical issues being resolved. Previously, these files were processed within less than 2 hours. Now they became invisible obstacles. No one directly blocked her, but every path was shrouded in a thin fog. Selena did not reply. She recorded the response time, took screenshots of the notifications, and saved them in a separate tracking folder. This was once a routine habit for handling internal surveillance cases. Now it had become a survival skill. At midday, she entered the break room. The murmuring conversation of 3 young officers immediately stopped. One forced a smile, snapped the coffee lid shut, and withdrew. The other 2 excused themselves as their phones rang and left. The room fell silent again, though the coffee machine still dripped steadily. A tingle sounded from her computer. Returning to her desk, she opened the new message. It was anonymous, unsigned, sent through the internal system as a one-time encrypted code. Being a boss doesn't mean everyone will follow. She read the line without changing expression. No anger, no shock, just a clear confirmation that what she was doing had begun to touch the real structure, the structure sustained by silence, concealment, and invisible consent. At the end of the day, Selena went to the locker room. No one was there. She took off her badge, placing it on the stainless steel table. The mirror reflected the image of a woman in a pale blue shirt, hands gripping her bag strap, back straight. Yet what she saw was no longer someone who had risen through the ranks by ability and a clean record. Instead, it was another figure, not soft, not bending to comfort. She looked a moment longer than a breath, then nodded lightly and pinned the badge back on. In the mirror was not a senior officer running a unit. It was a threat. Quiet, official, and recognized. An individual sharp enough to look straight into those who once bowed their heads and brave enough not to retreat from the shadowed place others called stability. Louise sat in a secluded corner of the academy library, where the yellow light cast over rows of old books and heavy wooden tables. In his hand was a crumpled sheet of paper, its top right corner curled, the print slightly smeared from the sweat of his palm. He had flipped through it so many times that he memorized every spelling mistake, every faint ink blot on the lower margin. This was the page Louise had subconsciously picked up when the backpack of a black woman was kicked across the park. An aggressive act by an officer that caught everyone's attention before they looked away. But Louise had bent down, hurriedly stuffed the paper into his pocket without reading it. At that moment, he simply thought he should not stand aside. But upon realizing the woman was the deputy sheriff, everything changed. He felt he was holding something not meant for him, something that could cause trouble if discovered. Louise had intended to discard it 3 times. The first time was the evening the incident happened, when he read the heading, Initial Statement, Code A17R, Victim Unidentified. The second time was when he saw a brief news post about the park incident circulating on the internal forum, accompanied by sarcastic comments from some young officers, getting asked a few questions and calling it discrimination. The third time was that morning when he looked again at the photocopy and noticed a detailed description. Injuries to the head area, fractured left cheekbone, nosebleed, no response after 3 minutes. Beneath that line was a scribbled note, without a name, but enough to show that someone had tried to make sure this case was recorded. Louise put the document into an envelope, slipped it into his jacket pocket, then messaged the only person who could understand how important it was, Selena Williams. He did not specify the content, but arranged to meet at a small cafe right beneath the city hall, where a dark wooden table and dim lighting were enough to avoid drawing attention. When Selena entered, Her gaze scanned the room, but without haste. Luis stood, bowed his head in greeting, then invited her to sit. Without introductions or preamble, he took the envelope from his jacket, opened it, and spread the paper on the table. "I think this belongs to you," he said, his voice steady but slower than usual. "I plan to keep quiet, but I can't forget the way that person looked at you, and I can't pretend I didn't see anything." Selena leaned down, scanning each line. When she looked up, her eyes revealed a shift from suspicion to focus, from acknowledgement to respect. Luis did not ask further. He knew that paper was not just evidence, but a test for himself, a boundary between doing what was right or choosing the safety the system quietly encouraged. "You chose to stand with the truth," Selena whispered, "and that won't be easy." Luis met her gaze, the first time not looking away. "You already chose. I'm just trying to follow." Selena sat at the desk, spreading out the documents Tasha had brought onto the wooden surface. The white light shone down on thin, worn pages with faded print, showing these were photocopies of an original file, no longer officially archived. She turned slowly, eyes scanning each paragraph, each punctuation mark, as if navigating a disrupted maze. On the fourth page, she paused. A short testimony, only 8 lines long, typed roughly and formatted irregularly as if inserted at the last minute. The first line clearly stated the incident time: April, 4 years ago, the same date as in file A17R. The content described a teenager handcuffed in a detention room, then struck in the head and stomach by a tall officer, light-haired, northern accent. The injury description, abdominal hematoma, bleeding inside the mouth, broken teeth, matched exactly what Tasha had recounted. Selena flipped to the next page. In the top right corner was a blue pen mark, handwritten, slanted, hurried. "Review carefully, no signs of resistance." Below were the initials, D. Alvarez. She looked up, opened her computer, and searched the list of investigators who handled that phase. Alvarez had been an assistant investigator in the Internal Affairs Unit, but was abruptly transferred to the Equipment Inventory Department 2 weeks after the date noted in the file. Since then, his name disappeared from any reports related to internal misconduct. She looked back at the note, not lengthy, not an accusation, nor a conclusion. But in the tone and word choice, Selena understood clearly. This was the voice of someone who once tried to prevent the truth from being erased, and perhaps was pushed out like Tasha. Selena slid the screen aside and reopened the saved file in the SISTI entry, A17R. There were no witness statements, no Alvarez. All official data stopped at the phrase, "insufficient evidence to continue investigation." What lay before her was a deliberately removed piece, not accidental but intentional. The door opened softly, and Louise stepped in. Before he spoke, Selena handed him the paper. "Look, this is a copy of the testimony deleted from the system. The person who wrote it is no longer an investigator." Louise read slowly, paused for a moment, then looked up. "Without this copy, none of this would have been pieced together." Selena nodded, eyes never leaving the blue ink. "You're not just a witness," she said firmly. "You just saved a part of the truth that seemed erased." Luis did not answer immediately, but in his eyes something had changed. No longer fear of the system, but the feeling of first realizing he had touched a pulse greater than himself and was keeping it from being silenced again. That morning, Selena received a notification via the internal email system. A video involving her was circulating on a local news site. Before she could open it, her phone began to ring continuously. Messages came from acquaintances in the field containing vague questions and subtle insinuations, making the atmosphere heavier than any emergency meeting. The video appeared on the screen with a preset title guiding viewers. "Deputy Chief of Police loudly threatens officer during a document check." The footage began at the moment Selena stood up, speaking to Brian with a decisive tone and eyes sharp as knives. However, what completely disappeared from the clip was the beginning, where she was questioned, insulted, and subjected to aggressive behavior from him. The editing was so skillful that anyone without initial information, would think she was the one who instigated the tension. On social media, numerous comments accompanied the clip. Some accused her of abusing power. Others mocked that here comes another person using skin color as a shield, and some called her the most annoying boss of the year. The polarization was clear, but what troubled Selena more was not the public's reaction, it was the reaction from within. When she entered the precinct, she clearly felt the avoiding gazes. A few greeted her as usual, but the distance in their eyes had changed. In the internal meeting room, the head of the inspection department requested Selena to provide a written report explaining the incident in a personal statement. She accepted, but inwardly understood someone was trying to turn everything around. Tasha sent a short message, encrypted through a secure channel. Compare the original data. The video has been altered. The current version was taken from an internal server. The manipulator has high-level access rights. Those words pierced like a knife. Selena immediately checked her personal backups, but found no differences. She remembered Gra E. Watson, the elderly woman in the worn coat, who had quietly recorded the entire incident. She called the number Grace had left, sending no lengthy message, just one sentence. "I need the original copy," Grace answered after 3 rings. Her voice was low and hoarse, but unsurprised. "I knew you would call," she said, "but the video I kept, I was just locked out of access this morning. Someone used a strange account to download it. I didn't allow it, but since then it disappeared from my server." Selena tightened her grip on the phone. This was no longer a technical glitch. This was a deliberate, planned move, orchestrated by someone. She opened her laptop and checked the internal access logs. Every trace was clean, too clean to be accidental. At that moment, she knew the opponent was not only trying to hide a wrongdoing, but wanted to create a new reality, where she was the problem, not the one seeking answers. To fight this, the truth alone was not enough. There had to be evidence at the right time, in the right hands, and in the right way. Selena met Marcus Doyle at a small cafe near the city outskirts, where the network signal was encrypted through a private system he had set up. Marcus was formerly an internal security technician who quit after refusing to alter data on his superior's orders. He didn't ask much or question the reasons, only plugged his device into Selena's computer and began working. "You want to trace who accessed the original video file, right?" Marcus asked, eyes fixed on the screen. Selena nodded. "And I need to know where the original disappeared from, when, and who had the rights to do that." After more than an hour of scrutiny, Marcus uncovered a hidden log stored in a subfolder not shown in the official system structure. The code clearly showed the original video was backed up on a secondary server labeled S-Delta-RF, part of the administrative department's backup system. The access account held the highest level data modification rights, with an administrative authentication code RHOPS4. Marcus paused and looked at Selena. RH, Roy Hanley. Selena studied the chain of actions on the screen. Opening the file, editing metadata, replacing it with a shortened version, renaming, updating the creation time, and finally deleting the original from the main system, all within less than 3 minutes. This perfectly matched the time when the system was notified of scheduled maintenance 3 days earlier, the time managed by Roy's administrative department. At this level, at least 2 people have to know and approve to operate, Marcus explained. But there is one exception: when the head of the maintenance system temporarily assumes control. Selena fell silent, but her fingers typed continuously. She cross-hectored this log with the access list to the server control room. Roy's name appeared clearly, time of entry, time of exit, the reason recorded as checking the backup connection. He probably thought no one would check back at that time, Marcus said, but server logs are beyond the cleaning scope of common audit software. He deleted it externally but forgot one thing: the server record doesn't require user commands to save. Selena extracted the entire log, printed a hard copy, and saved 2 additional encrypted copies. The first paper was placed into an envelope, sealed right there. She looked at Marcus. "Now I can confirm. He is not just covering up, he is redefining the truth, his truth, and anyone who believes that edited version is living in a reality he created." Marcus nodded slowly. "What are you going to do next?" Selena held the documents. eyes staring out the cafe window where the streets kept running normally. "I will start by asking the right people questions, and I won't let any answer be erased before being heard." She stood up and put the envelope in her jacket pocket. In her hands was no longer just evidence, but a key, unlocking the manipulation system, where power is digitized and truth. Tasha chose a small cafe located at the edge of the forest, where phone signals were weak and no one knew each other well enough to intrude. When Selena arrived, she found Tasha already seated in a shadowed corner near the window, with an old gray handbag beside her. Without any polite preamble, Tasha pulled out a portable hard drive from her bag and placed it on the table between 2 glasses of water. She said, "This is not part of any official record. I keep it. Not because I want to expose anyone, but because I know that someday someone will need to see it." Selena plugged the hard drive into her laptop. The screen displayed a series of digital files, scanned handwritten notes, original format recordings, all named with internal codes only understood by those who had worked in the inspection unit. Tasha continued, "This is the content I collected during 3 years working under Roy Handley. He didn't write the policies. He built the culture." A notes file was opened. The first page bore a title scribbled roughly: "Approach based on skin region characteristics, behavior, indirect response." It listed detailed instructions: how to approach black subjects with a low commanding tone, avoid soft language, keep a short distance to create pressure, and absolutely forbid the subject from questioning back. Selena flipped through each page. Every detail thickened the atmosphere in the cafe. She paused on a voice recording. A familiar voice came through the laptop speakers. "Never let black people feel they have control over the space. The police set the atmosphere before the subject can react. If you let them question back, you've lost the battle." Roy's voice was clear, slow, and evenly paced. There was no vulgarity, no anger, no call for violence. Yet every sentence was a lesson in invisible suppression, cloaked in the language of field handling tactics. Tasha looked at Selena. Her eyes no longer held the anger of the early days, but the exhaustion of someone who had fought the system too long. She said, "I thought I was obsessed the first time I heard him say these things, but then I saw how young officers copied him. Brian was one of the first. He absorbed it very quickly." Selena leaned back in her chair, folding her hands across her chest. She knew the feeling spreading inside her was not just anger, but a chilling clarity. Brian was not an exception. He was a product. And Roy was not a protector. He was the planter of seeds. Tasha added, "These recordings don't name anyone but Roy, because these sessions have no attendance lists, no organizing unit, no handouts. They call them experience sharing from reality sessions. But reality is never recorded in any official file." Selena stared at the screen as the files appeared one after another, like pieces of a map for a training machine working in the shadows. She no longer needed to question Brian's behavior. She was looking at an entire foundation that had nurtured it. Where deviance was taught as reflex, this was where the precise and relentless dismantling must begin. Back at the office, Selena started work quietly, but not slowly. She accessed all data related to internal training programs over the past 7 years. Under generic titles like handling sensitive situations or community response tactics, she found lists of officers who had attended. She opened 2 windows side by side, one listing participants of trainings coordinated by Roy Handley, the other summarizing complaints related to Roy Handley, the other summarizing complaints related to Roy Handley, the other summarizing complaints related to Roy Handley. She found lists of officers who had attended all the training directly to Roy, the other summarizing complaints related to Roy Handley, 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 the other summarizing complaints related to Roy Handley. The more she cross-vectored, the more she felt the ice beneath her thinning by the second. More than 70% of officers with at least one complaint appeared on the training lists associated with Roy. Many were young officers newly recruited and assigned to densely populated black neighborhoods. Another coincidence made Selena silent. Their first violations usually happened within months after the training. She continued reviewing administrative records and found a file titled Behavioral Orientation Tactics for Special Residential Areas. There was no author information, but the conclusion had a handwritten note, approved SRH. The slant and leftward stroke matched the handwriting in a suppressed report related to case code A17R. Tasha arrived late in the day, carrying more old files. Selena recounted all her findings. They sat together and compared notes. Though unspoken, both realized the scale of the problem had grown beyond the personal level. "You know," Tasha whispered, flipping through a document, "when a young officer is sent to training, he thinks he's learning to protect the community, but actually he's being programmed to distinguish between trusted people and those to control." Selena looked at the list. Each name was no longer a number, but a marker of a deliberately replicated chain of misconduct. She highlighted Roy Hanley's name in red on her summary report. From this moment, he was no longer just a report approver or coordinator. He was the architect of an ideology quietly operating within the legal system. She sent a copy of this report to a backup storage system, set a private password, then turned back to Tasha. "Now you understand," Tasha said evenly, without resentment or agitation, why, whenever an officer is accused, he doesn't panic. Because he believes he's part of a larger structure, built from policies, habits, lessons, and the silence of those who have seen but did not speak. Selena nodded softly. She had no need to ask more. She had seen enough to know that what she was facing was not an individual, but a system, and to break it would require more than evidence. It required courage from those pushed to the margins, but who never left the front line. The hearing room was arranged neatly. Cold, white light spreading evenly from the ceiling to the long table where 3 council members sat upright. The federal inspector representative sat in the middle. To the left was the state legal advisor, and to the right, a person from the civilian oversight group. Behind them was a wooden wall with no symbols, only a clock without ticking sounds. There were no cameras, no reporters, no mobile phone. Selena was called first. She stepped up to the podium carrying a numbered file, her voice neither loud nor stiff, but absolutely steady. She recounted the entire incident at Wilshire Park. The moment of approach, Brian Mitchell's words, the act of kicking the backpack, the threatening demeanor. She did not emphasize herself as the victim or inject personal anger into her words. Instead, she described how a police officer behaved before knowing the identity of the person in front of him. No one interrupted her. When Selena finished her presentation, the atmosphere remained the quiet stillness of administrative procedure. Roy Hanley was then invited to speak. He approached with a familiar posture, shoulders open, chin raised, polite eyes. "We acknowledge that the incident at the park was inappropriate, especially considering internal relationships across ranks within the department. Officer Mitchell's behavior is offensive and requires serious evaluation." Selena looked directly at him, knowing these opening remarks were just an introduction. After a brief pause, Roy shifted his tone. "However, it must be noted that Mitchell is a frontline officer, working under constant pressure. His personal reactions are a consequence of incomplete training processes and the lack of adequate behavioral models in sensitive community environments." The phrase sensitive community environment caused the civilian representative to frown slightly, but Roy continued, "I propose that this be treated as an isolated case, handled individually, and not representative of the entire department." Selena knew the phrase "not representative of the entire department" would be repeated many times. By separating Brian from the organization, Roy was trying to preserve the system's appearance of integrity. The council nodded, and the legal advisor took notes. Selena did not object or reclaim her turn to speak. She only stepped forward once more to say briefly, before the session adjourned, "If every violation is an exception, then this system has never had any rule." Her words made the council look up. There was no objection, but Selena understood that the silence was not because they did not hear, but because they were waiting to see what she would say next. And she knew the most important matters had yet to be laid on the table. The audio recordings, the shelved reports, the matching numbers across the specialized training courses. She was ready for those, But not today. Today, she let Roy believe he had won a small round. In that moment, he began to overestimate his confidence, as usual. Selena did not need to win quickly. She only needed enough silence to know she stood in the right place, before starting to dismantle every brick he thought untouchable. Brian stepped up to give his testimony, hands clasped in front of his stomach, eyes avoiding those observing. His voice was steady, trying to remain calm but betraying embarrassment facing the incident he had underestimated. He began with a familiar phrase. "I reacted instinctively in a situation that showed signs of risk." He then cited vague terms such as lack of clear identification, sense of defense, and unconfirmed situation. He completely avoided details about kicking the backpack or mentioning the discriminatory remarks uttered in the park. Selena sat silently, neither taking notes nor interrupting. She observed how Brian chose his words, how he glanced at Roy as if seeking a safe escape route with each phrase. A council member, the civilian representative, asked directly, "Did you know the person you were checking was your superior?" Brian hesitated briefly, his throat moving slightly. He answered ambiguously, "At that moment, I wasn't sure. I couldn't confirm clearly." Roy Hanley sat across the table, fingers lightly touching his pen, expression unreadable. He believed the hearing was proceeding according to his plan, shifting responsibility to the individual, narrowing damage to a single act to keep the system quiet. Selena did not cut Brian off. She did not immediately refute or debate. Instead, she let the silence stretch just enough, not too long to lose control, but long enough for the room to realize she did not need to respond with an argument. When invited to speak last before the council made a provisional conclusion, Selena stepped forward without carrying any files. She stood straight, scanning the room, before saying, "I have provided what is necessary for a beginning." She paused briefly and continued, "What comes next will concern the true nature of the system we are working with." No one asked further. The council acknowledged the statement and announced the end of the first session with a decision to temporarily review all records related to Officer Brian Mitchell over the past 3 years, including old complaints, internal assessments, and periodic inspection results. Selena left the meeting room in silence. She did not look at Brian or Roy. Her eyes were directed toward data, never presented. The old recordings from Tasha, the unencrypted files Grace held, and the quiet message sent to her last night from an intern named Lewis, who finally decided not to stay silent. Silence was not weakness. It was the time she needed to listen to the system, revealing its gaps. This time, those who believed they controlled everything were the ones unprepared for what was coming. Selena came to meet Grace at the Homeless Support Center, where she often went to receive food and spend the night. They sat in a small room, the dim light casting shadows on Grace's thin hands, gripping the handle of her cloth bag. Selena explained clearly her reason. She needed an independent witness to verify the original video, clarifying the process of internal data manipulation and editing. Grace was not surprised. She had waited for this day for a long time. She spoke slowly. "I am willing, but my real identity. They have used it to silence everything I ever said." Selena nodded, promising to keep all information confidential until she was sure the system could no longer harm Grace again. The next day, Selena contacted the legal department to verify Grace's background under the emergency witness procedure. She sent attached photos, descriptive information, and the original clip provided by Grace. Just a few hours later, the result came back. No matching records found. Civil, military, and judicial files recorded no one named Grace with the birth year she had stated. Selena felt something was wrong, but did not want to share this with anyone internally yet. She decided to search herself through a linked database connected to old military records. After 3 rounds of verification, Selena found a blurred record whose name had been archived. A nurse named Grace Holloway who had served in the Military Medical Corps, with access codes linked to the Department of Defense system. This file was marked incomplete with a note, "Administrative file forwarded." She followed the trail, but all links redirected to the city police department returned errors. That was the place where Grace had filed her complaint over a decade ago. In the old administrative office archives, Selena found a record referring to Grace's file with the status "temporarily held. No further processing due to insufficient evidence of abuse." The officer involved was not clearly named. There was only one line: "Information received from the military side. The complainant has a history of mental instability." The wording was as brief as a full stop to all of Grace's previous efforts. What sent chills down Selena's spine was the confirmation section. The file approver, with an encrypted signature, was R.H. Selena printed all the data, immediately saved it in an encrypted folder, and placed a copy on an offline hard drive. She returned to see Grace that evening. Placing the clipped record in front of her, she said nothing. Grace looked over it quietly and nodded. "I know who did this, and I know if I had spoken up louder that day, maybe a soldier wouldn't have lost a leg in that cell." Under the weak light, Selena clearly saw Grace's hands still trembling, but her voice remained steady. "If he still thinks he can erase me again, this time I will come out with you with my real name." Selena returned to the shelter in the late afternoon, carrying a file she had pieced together from old data. Inside was a printout bearing the name Grace Holloway, with faded administrative notes, passed through many departments before ending in a temporary hold status. When Selena placed the documents before her, Grace flipped through the pages without blinking until stopping at the encrypted signature at the bottom of the minutes. She whispered, "I know who signed the decision to hide my name." Leaning forward slightly, Grace recounted her time as a military nurse, serving at a treatment station on the northern military base. During a night shift, she witnessed a mid-ranking officer assault a severely wounded soldier after the soldier refused to provide information. Grace immediately wrote a report, attaching medical records and submitting it to the command unit. Instead of opening an investigation, the file was handed to a civilian intermediary, acting as a liaison between the military and local police. The name on the file, Roy Hanley. Grace never saw her file again after that day. No one called to confirm. A week later, she was ordered to transfer and then suggested to resign due to no longer meeting the requirements of interagency cooperation. She asked former colleagues, but all turned away or said that matter was handled by higher-ups. She laughed bitterly. He didn't need to tear up the papers, he just put them where no one has the right to ask. Selena was silent. For the first time, she saw the full structure of Roy's behavior. No public interference, no overt reactions, but using the system like a machine to erase all traces, every person, every testimony, every detail that could harm him. Selena marked everything: Grace's case, the A-17R minutes, the altered video data, the internal account authorized to modify the system. All the pieces led to Roy, not just as a figure behind Brian, but as a core manipulator. He did not protect individuals, he protected a model, where anyone who spoke up was erased from history. Grace's story was the final confirmation. Roy not only crushed resistance, he made those who dared resist cease to exist. Selena closed the file, her eyes resting on the faded note, transferred to another unit for processing, not suitable for further investigation. She whispered almost to herself, "I don't need him to fit the truth. I need the truth to no longer depend on anyone's permission." Grace nodded without smiling or thanking. She only took a rusty necklace from her coat pocket and put it back on her neck, as if at last she had been called by her real name. The third-floor office lights remained on while most other offices had already closed. Selena sat alone, the screen before her displaying a list of documents to compile for a federal report. Notes, case codes, and cross-references between hearing transcripts and internal systems were gradually taking shape. She typed into the Access Manager, entering a triple-layer security code. The screen flashed, then turned red. "Access denied." Selena paused and tried again, this time using supervisor-level access. The result was unchanged. Frowning, she attempted to log into her official email to check the path for submitting hearing content. The email froze, showing a shared folder among oversight units. Crucial files related to case A-17R and Brian Mitchell's disciplinary records had vanished completely. The folder labeled Confidential Internal was now empty. She switched to a secondary workstation in the meeting room, but the system there also reported access denial. A broad block disguised as a routine update. She checked the maintenance schedule. No planned activity at this time. Calling the overnight tech support, she spoke with an operator named Harris. His voice was slow and evasive, saying, "Your access rights are under review, and this may relate to internal reorganization of permissions." The response did not confuse Selena. Rather, it confirmed her intuition. The system was reacting deliberately. Standing, she moved toward the electronic board in the old investigation room, where she had previously saved a printed log of access times for internal accounts related to the case. Her access codes from the previous week had been completely revoked. No trace remained on the temporary backup. For the first time in her career, she was locked out of the very tools she had once overseen. As Selena reached for her personal phone to send information out, an unusual email popped up, not in the official inbox, but sent from Richard Voss's personal account, head of internal legal affairs. The subject read, "Recommendation to keep hearing content confidential. Urgent response request." The message was brief, without an official signature or legal citation, only a polite paragraph. "To ensure the organization's overall reputation, we recommend temporarily refraining from publicly disclosing details concerning allegations of misconduct by mid-level management. Sharing this information may lead to uncontrollable misunderstandings. We seek your cooperation and careful consideration." Selena reread the passage. The wording seemed courteous but carried a familiar threat beneath. An unofficial form of bargaining sent via a non-system channel, leaving no trace. She looked again at the screen. Access denied. The phrase stood like a declaration that from now on, she was no longer considered a secure part of the system. Yet a bigger question echoed in her mind. Who had enough authority to silently manipulate all access rights like this? And why tonight? The next morning, Selena arrived promptly on the 6th floor of the administrative building. She was summoned to a small auxiliary meeting room, lacking the usual built-in recording devices. The wooden door was closed, soundproof walls and dim yellow light gave the feel of a voluntary interrogation chamber. Richard Voss sat inside, tie loosened, hands clasped on the wooden table. He smiled when she entered, but the smile held no warmth. "Thank you for coming," Richard began, attempting a gentle tone. "I know you've been busy and under pressure lately. The recent hearing has left complex effects." Selena pulled up a chair without diverting her gaze from the man in front of her. She declined small talk, waiting for him to get to the point. Richard nodded slightly, understanding. "I think," he continued, "we should discuss how to maintain internal stability, especially as the media is aggressively exploiting recent events." Selena nodded softly, lips pressing together. Her exterior was calm, but each breath was taut. She knew this was not a consultative meeting, but a test of limits. Richard flipped open a thin file before him, unmarked officially. "I am authorized to convey an internal recommendation," he said, "that if, in the next hearing, you could adjust some sensitive points, specifically the language describing the role of middle commanders and supervisors, then the restoration of your account and data access would be considered more favorably." He spoke as if discussing a reduction in working hours. Avoiding her eyes, reading from a prepared script, Selena remained still, hands folded, legs unmoving. "That adjustment," Richard added, "is not about changing the truth, only choosing wording, less stressful to the internal system, reducing pressure on the organization." He smiled faintly, as if proposing a mutually beneficial deal. Selena looked down at the table, then raised her eyes sharply to him. "You mean," she said slowly, "if I agree to downplay the role of superiors in the cases I'm investigating, the system will pardon me with access?" Richard did not answer immediately, only shrugged and sighed. The silence confirmed everything. Selena nodded slightly, as if fully understanding the nature of this meeting. She said nothing further, stood, buttoned her coat, and spoke plainly, not loudly but clearly. If the system must rely on silence to survive, then it was flawed from the start. Richard did not stop her nor react. He gathered the file as if the meeting had never happened. People like him always knew how to turn bargaining into an afterthought. Selena left the room, walking down the corridor toward the data center. When she swiped her access card, the screen immediately displayed in red, "Incorrect code, access revoked." She tried again, this time with supervisor-level codes. Still rejected. The A17R case file, along with all documents labeled interagency, had vanished from her permissions panel. Standing still before the closed door, fingers gripping the code card in her pocket, she did not look back. Her back remained straight. The system was peeling away its mask layer by layer, and the act of blocking her from data confirmed she was getting too close to places many inside the force never dared to see. Loneliness was no longer a feeling, but a necessary state to move forward. But this time, she was not afraid, because after that bargain, what she needed to prove was not who was right, but what was being hidden by those who always claimed stability. The message arrived as the city sank into silence. Selena sat alone in her office, the light casting shadows over stacks of documents spread across the desk. Her phone screen lit up, displaying the sender's name, Tasha Monroe. Below was a brief message, no greeting, no explanation. "I've kept it for a long time. Now is the time to release it." Attached was an encrypted link requiring two-step verification. Selena put on her headphones and opened the audio file in an old internal recording app known only to former inspectors who could decode it. A faint static crackled, then a voice emerged. Deep, steady, familiar. "Roy Hanley. That internal report isn't anything special. She's just trying to stir things up." A sigh followed before he continued. "Don't worry too much about that, Williams. She won't bring us down, unless the kids speak up." Selena paused and rewound several seconds to listen to the end again. That statement was no slip of the tongue. It reflected a deeply rooted ideology, where those in power considered the silence of their subordinates a natural part of security. The kids, he wasn't talking about the victim. He was referring to the young, newly recruited, powerless, voiceless people. Interns, assistants, technical support staff, those who always see, always hear, but have never been trusted to dare speak out. Selena quickly noted the timestamps and marked 3 other positions within the recording. Roy's voice mixed with the sound of chair movements and overlapping background noises of an unofficial conversation. Yet it was clear this was not an offhand remark, but a directive. She fast-forwarded a few minutes, finding no further noteworthy content, then extracted the short audio segment, saving it separately as evidence. Although Tasha did not disclose the source, the timing and manner of sending suggested this was no impulsive act. The recording had been in someone's possession for a long time. That person did not reveal it or publish it, but kept it as a protective net. Selena leaned back in her chair, gazing out the fogged window. The city outside still slept, but inside the walls of the system some trembled, and others who had remained silent were beginning to move. The question gnawed at her mind. Who was the first to keep this recording, and why had they remained silent for so long until Tasha brought it out? Was it fear or a bargaining chip tightly held in the dark? She pressed the power button, removed her headphones, and reopened the personnel monitoring records. The list of those who had worked under Roy when he still controlled the inspection department. The first name appeared, linked to a paused file code, Devin Kells. That name had been glanced at once in a supervision report 3 years ago, an intern who suddenly resigned after a closed-door meeting with Roy. No reason given, no farewell letter, just disappeared. Selena recorded the name and shut down her computer. The room remained as silent as before, but now she understood. Silence was no longer meaningless. It was opening a new path from someone who had once left, and perhaps from the very kids Roy had underestimated. Tasha answered the call after 2 rings. Her voice was unhurried, as if she had been waiting. When Selena asked about the origin of the recording, Tasha replied briefly. It was stored on the inspection room's hard drive. A copy was accidentally retained when I was cleaning files 3 years ago. At that time, I didn't know what to do with it. Selena was silent for a moment, then asked, "Who recorded it?" A fragmented name came from the other end, Devin Kells. That name confirmed Selena's initial suspicion. Devin was an internal intern assigned to support data analysis in the inspection department, while Roy was in charge. According to records, Devin resigned after internal conflicts. The stated reason was incompatible with professional orientation, but no detailed minutes existed. "Has he contacted you since?" Selena asked. "No. After leaving, he completely cut off contact. I only know he's teaching at a prep training center in the West area," Tasha answered. That afternoon, Selena went to the address Tasha provided. The center was located in a quiet residential area, with a tiled entrance and a simple iron gate. A thin, tall man wearing an old shirt stood under the porch holding a textbook. When Selena introduced herself, his eyes briefly froze. Then he led her into a small room at the end of the corridor. "Where did you get that recording from?" Devin asked without sitting down. Tasha sent it. He nodded, walked over and closed the door. The room instantly shrank into an enclosed space, the ceiling fan turning steadily, creating a stifling background noise. Devin looked directly at Selena, neither avoiding nor rushing to trust her. "I didn't record it to oppose anyone," he said. "At that time, I just wanted evidence if I was accused. They had done that to the person before me." Selena did not interrupt. "That day, I was sent to a meeting with Roy and some HR people. I brought a recorder to take notes. I kept recording when they started discussing investigations. When Roy mentioned people to control testimonies, I realized something was wrong, but I didn't dare submit the recording. I knew if I did, I'd be called unsuitable, like those who had been pushed out before." Devin opened a drawer and took out a USB drive. "I sent a shortened version to Tasha once, but this is the full one. It has names, verbal orders, even Roy saying, if the newbies don't choose a side, we have to eliminate them before they learn to record." He placed the device on the table, but did not push it towards Selena immediately. "I kept it for 3 years because I trusted no one. But if you are the one brave enough to stand among those people, maybe it's time for me to let it go." Selena took the USB and nodded. She did not say thank you, because what he had given was not a favor. It was part of a truth strangled for years. As she stepped out of the center, Selena noticed the sunlight had shifted toward the treetops. She glanced back and saw Devin leaning against the doorframe, his eyes no longer hesitant. The young man, once pushed out of the system, was now helping to open it from the edge. In her hand was a recording that could tear apart the entire defense chain, but in her mind, clearer than anything else, was the phrase heard the night before, "She won't bring us down unless the kids speak up." Now, those kids had spoken, and Roy Hanley was about to learn the consequences of underestimating the silence. The announcement appeared mid-morning, neatly placed in the internal mailbox with a cold subject line, "Temporary suspension of intern Louise Ramirez." The content was brief, formatted strictly according to administrative standards, citing a clause on violation of witness contact procedures, but without attaching any minutes or statements from those involved. Selena read the words repeatedly, yet the vague feeling did not lie in the text, but in the emptiness behind it. Luis was an intern. He had no authority to meet witnesses directly, nor any reason to act beyond permitted scope. Yet, throughout the entire case, Luis was the only one who spoke up, who stepped forward when others chose to turn their backs. And now, he was the first to be quietly removed from the stage. Selena typed a letter to the head of training using formal language, only requesting confirmation of the suspension reason and the next course of action. After 15 minutes with no reply, she sent 2 more letters, this time to Human Resources and the internal legal assistant. The mailbox showed the status sent, but no responses came. She then checked shared folders related to case A17R, which had previously contained updates about hearing schedules and processing progress. All showed access errors. Trying to find old emails between her and colleagues who had worked on the case, most folders were now marked under review. Direct messages within the internal communication system were either unread or oddly silent. She realized what was happening was not a technical coincidence. Her account was not locked, emails still sent, but no one replied, a form of silent blockade. The administrative system had chosen a method more sophisticated than disciplinary action. Isolation without accusation. Selena left her office and walked to the digital oversight unit, where she knew someone had maintained a working relationship for years. Marcus Fielding, head of access analysis. The office door was slightly open. She knocked lightly. He turned around, startled to see her. "I need to confirm access to Luis's account activity history," she said. "Has anything unusual happened in the system?" Marcus stood up, closed the door, lowering his voice. "I know what you're doing, but I'm not allowed to discuss this privately. We have instructions from above. All requests must go through legal channels." Selena stared into his eyes without a word. In that look, she read what words could not convey. Fear, not of her, but of something larger that had crept into every corridor, every mailbox, every meeting reminder. She left without turning back. The hallway felt longer than usual. Every door closing sounded like an unspoken answer. Back at her desk, Selena reopened her personal folder, searching for correspondence related to the hearings. Previously saved notes now all show sync errors. She opened the account activity log. All recent views from servers lacked clear identification of addresses. The feeling of being pushed out was no longer a hypothesis. It had started with Luis and now spread to her, step by step, cutting ties with former collaborators. Selena did not type any more emails. She took a blank sheet and handwrote the names of people who had replied to her letters in the past month. 8 names, none of whom spoke now. Inside her there was no anger, only a clearer truth. The system would not use public methods to bring her down, but would choose to make her disappear quietly from contact networks as if she had never belonged here. But if they thought silence would stop her, they forgot that the fiercest storm often begins when everything seems completely still. A message arrived in her personal inbox early afternoon, sent by Lindsay Marks, a reporter who had closely followed the Park case from the start. Selena clearly remembered Lindsay's call a week earlier, proposing an exclusive interview about the second hearing and Case A17R. The appointment was set in detail in a discreet location with a promise of witness anonymity. But now, the message contained only one cold line. "Sorry, the interview must be canceled. No further discussions are possible." No explanation, no pleasantries. Selena put down her phone and opened a browser. She typed a familiar search term, Selena Williams internal hearing. A few days ago, articles from Rights Observer, Civil Pulse, and 2 local newspapers still ranked in the top 3 results. Now the rankings had fallen, replaced by irrelevant secondary links. She clicked 2 widely circulated articles. Both led to blank pages with the phrase, "Content no longer exists or has been removed at legal request." She searched further, accessing a forum specializing in archived copies of removed articles. Even there, the most cited interview with Grace had vanished, accompanied by a warning. "This document is under review according to independent content ownership regulations." The tiding no longer felt confined to the police department. It was spreading beyond government corridors, touching the information channels Selena had once considered independent. She called Grace. The line was answered after the first ring, her voice steady as always, not weary, despite being nearly 60. "I just received a notice," Grace said before Selena could speak. "Someone from the Video Archive Center contacted me, asking to temporarily remove the original footage. They said they were reviewing legal issues because of sensitive image identification. Did you agree?" "No. But they said if I don't remove it, the platform's release will be suspended for violating the terms." Selena closed her eyes for a few seconds. The old woman, who had lived through 2 rounds of discrimination, had once hidden a camera under a torn cloth bag, was now being handcuffed by the very terms created in the name of transparency. Returning to her desk, Selena logged into the internal data distribution portal, storing all cross-agency report copies. The screen displayed an error, access denied, insufficient permission level. Her typing stopped midway. The silence in the office was no longer just the sound of a fan and the bright white screen. It was deliberate silence, orchestrated by a system once proud of its transparency rules. She took pen and paper, quickly writing each name. Journalists who had contacted her, articles shared, and platforms that had published. Upon reaching the 8th name, her hand hesitated. Continuing was meaningless if all external doors were simultaneously closing. Selena opened her computer and drafted a short email to Tasha. The subject line was all she needed the other person to read. If all remain silent, we will need voices from outside the system. The email's body contained only one sentence: prepare for the second option. After pressing send, Selena leaned back in her chair, not from exhaustion, but to take a deep breath before turning to the drawer where she kept unpublished case files. The final draft had not yet reached the press or been sent to federal inspectors. She knew that opening it now meant no turning back. But when the system chose to erase traces from media to data, the only option left was to create a trace that could not be deleted. And that had to begin with someone still willing to speak, amid a crowd choosing silence. Selena entered the cafeteria right at noon, carrying her familiar stainless steel tray. The smell of pre-cooked food, mixed with the clinking of utensils, echoed steadily through the space. On the far wall hung the old motto of the precinct: unity, discipline, service. The faded letters no longer attracted attention, but today they quietly felt, ironically, bitter. She walked along the counter, choosing her meal as usual. The server handed her food without meeting her eyes, moving more mechanically than usual. No one smiled, no one greeted. She wasn't surprised, yet each detail lightly pierced the silence in her mind like a pinprick. Selena scanned for a seat. The tables near the entrance were already occupied. A few familiar officers eating there noticed her glance, and immediately bowed their heads over their soup bowls or turned away pretending to talk. She didn't wait for an invitation. An empty table near the window was the only option not filled with cautious stares. Her footsteps sounded clearly amid the general noise. Conversations lowered their tones abruptly, then gradually returned to their previous rhythm once she sat down. But the intensity of sideways glances left a faint ache in the atmosphere. Selena stabbed her spoon into the rice, eating slowly and with measured movements. Outside the glass door, sunlight slanted onto the lawn, glittering on the roofs of a long row of parked cars. Inside the cafeteria, everyone continued their lunch as if her presence were a void to be avoided. Officers who had shaken her hand after the early hearing now sat 2 rows apart, talking about last night's football game, never once looking back. When she stood to throw away the leftover vegetables, a group of officers entered from the cafeteria gate. They laughed loudly, walking down the aisle as if deliberately claiming all eyes. The leader, Lieutenant McDonnell, scanned the room, stopping where Selena had just passed. His voice rang out in the crowd like a half-truth, half-threat. Between the court and the organization, pick a side. No one survived standing in the middle. Laughter followed, just enough to avoid being seen as openly mocking, but loud enough to cover the invisible sting in the air. Selena didn't turn her head. She carried the tray back to the table, sat down, and continued her unfinished meal. No one came near or spoke, but her eyes were no longer focused on the food. They scanned the room, direct and clear, with no conciliatory language. At that moment, the crowded cafeteria felt frozen. No one asked her to leave, nor did anyone protect her. Isolation needed no official order. It happened through small choices by everyone around, choosing a different table, turning their backs, choosing not to ask questions. Selena didn't need anyone to confirm she was being pushed out. The atmosphere confirmed it more clearly than any document. But she didn't bow her head. Sitting in the room, she kept her back straight and her gaze cold, as if silently saying, "Those who truly choose to stand in the middle are the ones who see injustice but remain silent." A small sound came from the other side of the table, enough to pull Selena's gaze away from the invisible void before her. A tray of food was placed down. light but definite. A young officer sat opposite her without asking, not looking around for consent. His short hair still bore even cuts, his shoulder seams unfrayed. The name tag on his left chest clearly read, Elliot Tran. The cafeteria paused briefly. No one spoke, but the movement of spoons slowed almost in unison. No laughter. No one broke the prolonged silence between the two at the corner table. Selena looked at Elliot. His eyes did not avoid hers, but showed no challenge either. He said nothing, starting to eat his rice as if it were a daily habit. In the atmosphere programmed to exclude her presence, this action was neither loud nor rallying, but carried the weight of a stone dropped onto a frozen lake. Selena didn't ask why. She didn't say, enjoy your meal. In her mind, the sound of typing, denied access, silent inboxes, and McDonald's recent sarcasm still lingered. But Elliot's quiet presence felt like a different breath amid the long, suffocating tension. Elliot ate slowly, not looking around or showing tension. Perhaps he knew what he was doing would be noticed. Perhaps he had accepted it before even stepping forward. Selena didn't need to verify that. As the meal neared its end, Elliot put down his spoon, wiped his hands with a napkin, and whispered low enough for only her to hear, I've been following the hearing since day one. I know I haven't done anything yet, but you should know someone's watching your every step. They haven't dared come forward, but that doesn't mean they aren't observing. Selena remained silent for a few seconds, not out of doubt, but to let that statement seep in like a secondary vein after days of blockage. No need for anyone to stand out front, she replied. It's enough that some don't turn away. Elliot nodded, stood up, and carried his tray toward the sink, yet that step became the focal point for those trying to pretend not to hear or see. A lieutenant 3 tables away glanced his way, eyebrows knitting briefly in hesitation. Another, holding a coffee cup, froze mid-motion. Selena didn't look around. She stayed seated, back lightly resting against the chair. The feeling of loneliness hadn't disappeared, but no longer weighed like a stone. In the tightening grip of isolation, sometimes an unspoken act is enough to create the first crack. When her tray was almost empty, she stood up, carefully cleaned up as if nothing special had happened. But the footsteps leaving the cafeteria that day were no longer as heavy as that morning. No one in that room stopped her, but no one stepped forward either. The silence remained, but had transformed. Its surface was no longer flat, and that was the first sign that the crack was beginning, from the deepest place of those who seemed to stand outside. The 3rd floor of the archive wing behind the administrative building had been nearly forgotten since Lieutenant Colonel Marvin Cole retired. Room 37, once the storage for confidential internal investigation files, was now covered with a thin layer of dust and the distinctive musty smell of decaying paper. Selena stood before the slightly ajar door, holding a temporary key, issued by the inspection department just that morning. Her eyes quickly scanned the faded label, still stuck on the door's edge. Miss Cole Special Archive. She pushed the door open. The hinge squeaked softly. Inside were 4 rows of old metal cabinets, most still marked with pale yellow tape and nearly illegible handwriting. A flickering fluorescent bulb overhead cast intermittent light, making the space eerily silent. Selena stepped down the narrow aisle between the cabinets, stopping at the last row. One bottom drawer's lock was misaligned, not properly secured, and its handle showed signs of hurried opening. She bent down and pulled out the drawer. A cloud of dust rose to her nose, making her frown slightly. Inside, among the corner-worn file folders, was a loosely clipped document bundle, unlike the official red-bound covers. The papers were creased, edges curled as if once crumpled. Selena took the bundle, shook it gently, and opened the first page. The headline struck her immediately. Report conclusion, Case Code A17R. Flipping quickly to the second page, the content went straight to the assessment. No action. Evidence not verified. Witnesses uncooperative. Records lack linkage. The familiar administrative language is used to close controversial cases lacking public pressure. Selina turned to the end. A blue ink signature stood out clearly. Roy Hanley. She stared intently at the signature. Something was off. This was not the handwriting she had seen on Roy's recent documents. His genuine signatures bore a neat curve on the letter R and a naturally extended tail. Here the script was stiff, unusually slanted, with a slightly shaky end, as if penned by an unpracticed hand. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out an old printed complaint Roy had signed and placed it beside the document for comparison. The two signatures matched in content, but differed markedly in pressure and steadiness. She turned to the third page. Near the bottom, a faint pencil note was nearly crossed out. "I did not sign this. Ask Roy." Selina held her breath. The note was off-center, near the bottom edge, exactly where veteran officers often scribbled temporary remarks when the minutes were not yet finalized. Instead of being erased, someone lightly struck through it, enough to hide from a quick glance but readable to the observant. She closed the file, drumming her fingers on the worn, soft cover. A thought pressed in her mind. If Cole truly hadn't signed, and Roy's signature was forged, then this conclusion report was finalized after Cole's retirement, not by the board, not through internal review, but by someone wanting to close Case A17R as if it never existed. Scanning the remaining drawers in the same row, behind a torn cardboard box, she found a small envelope labeled Marvin Private Notes. Inside were several handwritten papers with shaky but legible handwriting. She recognized the script as matching the faint pencil note seen earlier. Selina clenched her fist. No more proof was needed to know what she held was not a clerical error, but a piece of a system falsifying records, an old fingerprint attempting to bury both truth and responsibility. She stood, carefully repacking the files, eyes still roaming the cold room. The musty smell of old paper and lingering silence filled the space with unspoken words. This time, she would not let them be buried again. Returning to her office with the A17R file clutched tightly, her heart heavy as stone, outside, everything ran as if nothing had happened. But she knew she had just uncovered something someone had deliberately tried to bury. Sitting down, she reviewed Roy Hanley's signature again, eyes tracing every curve and slant, before quickly opening the internal digital archive. She found 3 other documents Roy had approved in previous years: supervisory reports, emergency meeting minutes, a reassignment order, all bearing signatures identical in every fold, scanned and stored with security. The A17R file's signature was different, looking hurried, as if by someone imitating Roy's signing habit. Selina printed the 3 authentic signatures, placing them beside the one in the A17R file. The differences were striking. She underlined the variances: pen pressure at the start, the dip at the Y tail, and the length of the loop in the R. She made notes and decided to check the timeline. The A17R report was dated in 2019. At that time, Roy was an internal security assistant without the authority to conclude cases. The authority belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Marvin Cole, who retired a few months later. This made Roy's signature on the report highly suspicious. For further verification, Selina went to the Administrative Archive Department to request the official signature samples Roy had registered. The officer handed her a scanned copy from 2017. Comparing all 5 samples, none matched the one in A17R. It was a forged signature. She called Edgar, who had worked under Lieutenant Colonel Cole and was now retired but still lived in the city. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the precinct. Edgar arrived on time, thin, with neatly cut white hair and still wearing a worn old watch. Selina placed the printed A17R file in front of him and asked bluntly, "Did you ever see this report during your time working with Lieutenant Colonel Cole?" Edgar took the paper, donned his glasses, and read silently. After a few minutes, he nodded. "I remember this case. A boy was beaten and hospitalized. Cole had a draft of this, but he said he didn't want to sign yet due to missing hospital records." Selina pointed to the signature at the bottom. "Did you see him sign off on the conclusion?" Edgar frowned. "I don't think he ever signed it. When I left, Cole said they were still waiting for further investigation. After that, I never came back." She turned the page, pointing to the struck-out pencil note. Edgar looked closely, then murmured, "That's his handwriting. He often wrote notes like that. Once, someone pressured him to sign quickly, and he slammed the table, saying, 'I don't sign for anyone, especially that Roy.'" Edgar paused, voice lowering. "You're digging into something many want buried." Talina folded the documents, thanked him. On her way back, she quickly recorded her deductions into her phone. Forged signature, unauthorized approval, no legitimate conclusion, improper case closure, all pointing to one fact. Someone tried to erase the traces of case A17R and used Roy's name to legitimize a wrongful decision. That night, in her small apartment, Selena spread all the papers across her table. The warm yellow light illuminated the lines that began connecting. This was no isolated incident. It was a top-down manipulation pattern, systematic, timed, with complicity from those sworn to uphold justice. Among the papers, Marvin Cole's final handwritten note remained visibly crossed out with a pencil. Selena looked at it a long time, then took a black marker and drew a bold line underneath. This was the sign she would present before the investigation board, not as the final proof, but the first, opening a deeper excavation into a past distorted by someone's ruthless hand. The wind was still as Selena parked in front of an old wooden house nestled among ancient pines on the northern edge of the city. The house bore the aura of a previous generation, quiet and dignified. She had arranged the meeting earlier with a brief phone call. On the other end was the voice of a mature woman, sharp yet unhurried, asking for full name, reason for meeting, and position in the confirmation email. Selena understood she was meeting someone cautious. The door opened as she stepped onto the porch. Evelyn Cole appeared in a gray sweater, her silver hair tied neatly at the nape. Her eyes scanned the badge hanging at Selena's waist, but revealed nothing. She led Selena into the living room, gestured to a chair, poured tea, and then sat opposite without speaking. Selena placed the thin file on the table, separating a sheet with a faded pencil note in the corner. "I did not sign this. Ask Roy." Evelyn took it, lowered her glasses, and examined every letter closely. Selena said nothing, allowing silence to play its role. After a few minutes, Evelyn nodded lightly and stood to go inside. Returning, she carried a small wooden box with a brass rotary lock, the wood darkened by age. Setting it on the table, she spoke softly. "Before he passed, he told me to keep this. If anyone came looking for case A17R, I should open it." Her voice did not tremble, but there was a weight like dust from time settling over memory. Selena opened the box. Inside was an envelope tied with a silver ribbon, 3 carefully clipped thin paper bundles, and a notebook with faded blue ink. She opened the envelope first. The handwriting was neat, strong. Words of Lieutenant Colonel Marvin Cole. I was pressured to sign. They brought a pre-typed report, filled in my name, but every sentence was not the voice I normally use in internal affairs. When I asked who wrote it, they said it was agreed upon by command. I just had to sign to close the file. Selena paused, each word striking the table firmly and straightforwardly. She continued reading. I refused to sign. Weeks later, the entire original file for case A17R disappeared from my desk. I could not find who took it, only knowing that Roy Henley's assistant was there before me that morning. I reported the missing file to the coordination office but received no reply. A week later, I was recommended to retire early to avoid burnout. My wife was the only one I trusted to keep a copy. Evelyn was silent the entire time, her hands folded in her lap. Selena flipped through the attached bundles. One was a report with a forged signature, identical to the one stored in the system. Another was the unedited version, clearly showing the victim's name, initial details, and recommendation for further investigation. The last was an internal letter from the legal office stating, "Insufficient grounds for criminal investigation." Selena inhaled deeply. Beneath that silent stack of documents lay a resistance long forgotten, a person who chose not to sign when everyone else turned away. She looked at Evelyn and asked slowly, "Has anyone ever come here asking you about this box?" Evelyn nodded. 2 months after he died, a man dressed like an inspector, no ID, asked if I kept anything related to any internal investigations. I didn't answer. Selena closed the file and lightly gripped the wooden box. You kept your promise to him. I will keep that promise for justice. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment, then said slowly, Don't let it sink into silence again. Selena stood, bowed, and left the wooden house. In her hands were not the system's evidence, but the last will of a man who had lived for professional honor. This time, she would not let it disappear. The quiet atmosphere remained in the wooden room, even after Selena carefully packed the files into her bag. Evelyn still sat there, her hand resting lightly on the armrest, eyes distant, as if weighing something. Was not always like this, she said slowly. Before his final year, Marvin was optimistic and believed in internal discipline, but in the last months he often woke at midnight, reopening old files, rereading them, as if afraid they would be changed without his knowledge. She paused, her eyes heavy, then continued, He once told me a strange thing. If anything happens to me, it won't be because of age. It will be because I refused to be a cover-up man. When I asked, he just smiled and said it was best if I didn't look into it. Selena sat quietly, her hand gripping the bag strap. Evelyn's story confirmed what she had suspected. Case A17R was not just deleted from the system, but had been the center of a silent battle within, where those who would not yield were pushed out of the game. Evelyn told of a phone call the night before Cole decided to retire. It was from command, but the caller left no name. He said, Better to stop. The system knows how to adjust itself. Your issue does not need to become an investigation. Marvin hung up without a word. The next morning, he wrote his resignation and mailed it himself. Didn't let me help or explain. Selena asked about visitors after the funeral. Evelyn nodded in a low voice. There was one, dressed like law enforcement, but I never saw him in any unit Marvin worked in. He stood at the door, gently asking if Marvin left any notes, notebooks, anything about his time as inspector. I didn't answer. I closed the door. He never returned. Selena took out her phone, wrote her personal number on a piece of paper, and placed it on the table. If you notice any sign of being followed or asked about the past, call me directly. Whoever comes has no right to touch what he left. Evelyn took the paper, then placed her thin hand over Selena's, squeezing lightly, her eyes no longer guarded but rare with trust. Selena stood, adjusted her coat, looked down at the now closed wooden box, then back at Evelyn. He didn't sign because he didn't trust that his file was true. I will sign to bring the truth back. Evelyn did not answer, only nodded, eyes moist but steady. Selena stepped out of the wooden house, her heart heavy with the silence that those before had been forced to swallow. But this time she would not go alone. In her hands was not just evidence, but a promise, and with promises like that she could not retreat. Grace arranged to meet Selena at a small cafe tucked between two old buildings, where the city's noise seemed to stop beyond the dusty glass window. She sat in the innermost corner, wearing a dark coat, her eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for the right moment to release a memory long suppressed. When Selena arrived, Grace asked no questions. She simply placed a small USB on the table and gently pushed it forward. I once cared for a child in a shelter, Grace said evenly, her gaze never leaving Selena's hands. He told me he had been beaten by police until his bones broke. At first I thought he was exaggerating, until I saw the scars on his back and the way he flinched whenever anyone in uniform approached. Selena took the device, feeling her palms grow slightly cold. She did not ask why Grace had kept it all this time. Some evidence, if presented at the wrong moment, could turn its holder into someone pushed to the margins. Back at her office, Selena powered on her personal computer and plugged in the USB. An audio file appeared with a simple name, Isaiah B. Selena rested her hand on the desk, put on headphones, and pressed play. The voice was young, hoarse, and halting, as if trying to maintain calm with every sentence. I am Isaiah Brooks. That day, I was walking home after asking for food at a church. On the way, 3 officers in uniform approached me. They asked what I was doing in the area. I answered normally, but one said my tone was disrespectful. A pause followed, then heavy breathing continued. They pushed me against the wall. They said they were searching my pockets. When I turned my head, one punched my ribs. I fell. Another kicked my back. I didn't resist. I cried out in pain. They held me there for 15 minutes, then left. No ambulance called, no report made. Selena rewound, listening to every detail and break in the narration. Isaiah's voice was not frantic. It was cruelly calm, as if he had told this story so many times that he had lost feeling. She opened the internal archive and searched for a case under Isaiah Brooks' name. A record appeared dated 8 years earlier. The case was closed simply because the victim withdrew and did not follow up. However, in the notes column was another short line. Approached twice, insufficient grounds to open investigation. Selena checked the attachments. There was a photo of Isaiah upon admission, his face swollen, ribs bandaged, eyes barely open, accompanied by an injury certificate from the regional hospital. But there was no official report, no officer's name, no case number. The entire file ended with a single line, no prosecution. She printed the documents, marking every timeline and every neglected gap. On the system, the case was considered closed. Yet Isaiah's recording revealed he had visited the police station twice to file complaints. No one received him. No one recorded his presence. Then, his name vanished from the workflow as if it had never existed. Leaning back in her chair, Selena stared at the phrase "victim withdrew." In her mind, that bureaucratic term was no longer an administrative label, but a tool of erasure. No need to burn documents or forge reports. Just record that the person withdrew. She opened the city map and typed the locations where Grace had volunteered. Isaiah had lived at a shelter near Shelterline. If he still remained in the area, he would now be in his 20s, no longer a teenager to be ignored, yet without any official record recognizing him as a victim. Selena quickly noted his name in the expanded investigation file. She stood, placed the USB into a sealed envelope, and looked out the window. The late afternoon light outside could not soften the feeling that the system had chosen to forget a voice because it was too real, too inconvenient, and too easy to deny. But this time, he would not be left behind. The Shelterline area was silent, like a waiting space in the late afternoon. The air among rows of people sitting close to the walls was thick with sweat, smoke, and the smell of food from a mobile kitchen. Selena walked past the long line of people waiting for meals, listening to each name called slowly from the list. When the volunteer woman reached Isaiah Brooks, a head bowed in the farthest corner twitched slightly. A thin young man, wearing a worn coat and a hood pulled over most of his face, accepted the meal and then turned to leave, as usual. Selena stepped forward and called his name firmly. Isaiah stopped, but did not turn around. She handed him a paper with a printed photo of him from his old hospital record. "I'm here to listen, not to repeat what they did to you." Isaiah did not take the paper. His gaze shifted away and a harsh voice came from beneath the hood. "I don't trust the police. Trusting you is just wasting time." Selena did not reply immediately. She stepped back half a pace, keeping her distance. Just then, Grace appeared from the other side of the food line, holding a bottle of water and some tissues. She approached silently and sat beside Isaiah like an old mother familiar with him in ways that needed no words. Isaiah hesitated, then took the tissues from her. He turned slightly, his eyes lingering on Selena's face for a long moment. "I came there 3 times, he began, his voice rough. The first time they said the case wasn't entered. The second time they said more verification was needed. The third time they said I wasn't in the system. They said I never came." Selena stood quietly, hands lightly clutching her bag. What Isaiah said was absent from every internal report she had ever read. He had been erased, not by technology, but by the deliberate neglect of an entire mechanism. "Are you willing to tell it again?" Selena asked. "Just once, in your own voice, just one sentence for me to record. I'll handle the rest." Isaiah looked around, then pulled his hood down. His face was gaunt, features broken and pieced back together by time and survival. He nodded quietly. Selena took out her phone and turned on the recording mode. Without being prompted, Isaiah lowered his head and spoke into the device. "I am Isaiah Brooks. I was beaten by the police, and they said I didn't exist. But I am still here, and I have not forgotten." She saved the audio file, naming it simply Voice Revived. Grace placed her hand gently on Isaiah's shoulder. Selena watched them both, her heart heavy with a silent movement. She made no promises to him because this time promises were unnecessary. It was enough to preserve the existence of a voice once blurred, and to bring it back to the place that had tried to erase it. The working sessions between Selena, Tasha, and Louise stretched late into the night in a fifth-floor meeting room, one without cameras, rarely visited, and with walls thick enough to soundproof. The whiteboard was covered with yellow sticky notes, each revealing old case codes alongside repeatedly appearing conclusions. Lack of evidence. Victim uncooperative. Case closed by streamlined procedure. Tasha held a red pen, connecting timestamps into chains, gradually forming a pattern that could not be called random. Luis was the first to spot irregularities in the report-writing style. He presented a printout with identical concluding sentences, matching punctuation and phrases, across 4 incidents separated by nearly 2 years. The coincidence was that all 4 reports bore the approval name Roy Handley, but the content below was handwritten by a human resources staff member and scanned into the system. This person did not belong to any investigative unit, nor held authority for scene handling or witness interviews. Luis pointed to the pasted-over signature, explaining, "Digital reports, but with paper signatures. These weren't submitted through electronic procedures. They handled it outside the system, then re-uploaded copies." Tasha traced internal links using an old account that still had temporary viewing rights. She found an original draft, not yet locked. Metadata showed it was composed 2 days after the case closure, meaning the report was written after the incident was shelved. Selena reopened old internal emails between the inspection unit and the legal department. A series of brief, evasive replies followed a repeated pattern: insufficient grounds for escalation, lack of continuing indicators, suspended pending adjustment. Notably, all emails were sent by subordinates of Richard Voss. From here, the structure began to emerge. At the center was Roy Handley, who once held supervisory control over all internal inspections. Surrounding him were 3 branches: a human resources group responsible for legalizing documents, a legal advisory team that closed cases with administrative language, and a third group, data management, controlling access rights and document flow. Selena marked each name, signature date, and replaced scans. They recognized over a dozen cases processed with identical patterns, starting with a strong complaint held for 7 days, then reclassified as no prosecution, and given different case codes to avoid duplication with federal systems. Tasha snapped her pen upon discovering a file for Jared Sloan, a young officer who had requested a reinvestigation into a brutal arrest. Within 3 months of submitting his proposal, Jared was transferred out of the force for lack of suitability. She found his final note in the internal system: "If no one reviews the video footage from that shift, I will send it directly outside." That was his last communication through any department channel. Selena silently wrote his name on the board, drawing a straight line from Jared to Roy. This was no coincidence. It was a systematic response to those who tried to intervene. Before them lay a network map no longer hypothetical, but a chain of linked facts. Roy did not act alone. He coordinated, others executed, erased traces, and ensured everything vanished before leaking externally. Louise pushed back his chair, leaned back, and exhaled sharply. So every time someone wants to speak up, they are extinguished by a nameless file. Selena turned back to the board, writing a sentence at the top: "Who controls the punctuation controls the entire report." She retyped the entire system on her computer, grouping data into a special file named chain_voice. Now it was time to turn this diagram into a weapon, and this time even every comma would be called by name. The next morning, an email was sent from the official deputy police chief's account to all district heads. The subject line was simple: Interdepartmentaler Inspection Data Update. Pre-meeting review required. The attached file weighed nearly 300 pages with a subheading quoting, "Every order leaving no trace must be named with evidence." Selena sat in the main meeting room, facing a large screen displaying the network map painstakingly constructed over many nights. At its center was Roy Handley, branching out clearly to 3 units, each covering different cover-up functions: legal, human resources, and data oversight. Arrows indicated not only direction, but signature times, processing accounts and excerpts from leaked emails or internal documents. To the right was a list of cases sharing timing, closure methods, and identical concluding phrases. Among them was the file of Isaiah Brooks. The room gradually fell silent as attendees viewed the injury images beside the phrase, "Victim ceased cooperation. Case closed." Selena did not need to reread. She let the data speak. Every displayed case led to the same pattern: early closure, reclassification, and code changes. Especially when Tasha sent a deeper analysis, they saw at least 14 cases handled under Roy's coordinated leadership, none independently verified. Richard Voss appeared at the diagram's end, next to a red symbol. A document extracted from old files showed him explicitly directing internal orders to cut federal code chains to keep cases within the department. The stated reason was to avoid unnecessary impacts on organizational reputation. Selena stood, looking around the room. No one interrupted. Her tone was calm, not angry, as she read clearly, "We are not talking about an individual abusing power. We are talking about a cover-up system built with procedural steps and commas. And today I hold the names of everyone who placed those commas." All eyes focused on the presentation board. Those who had sat silently in previous meetings began lowering their heads to their notes. The first to leave was the deputy HR director. Without a word, a printed network map was sent to the federal inspector's office and the Regional Justice Oversight Committee. Selena needed no approval. She sent it as the highest responsible person still standing in the system. On her way back to her office, she received an anonymous message on her personal phone. Only one line: "You shouldn't touch what is still protected." She deleted it immediately, then plugged a USB containing all data into an internal encrypted vault, bypassing any sharing network. From now on, it was no longer about Roy or Richard. This was about an operational model that had survived too long thanks to silence. But this silence had been leaked, with real names and real signatures, and from today, everyone on that map would understand that the network was no longer metaphorical. It had a concrete address, and every name would be called out. Selena received urgent authorization from the Federal Oversight Board after the hearing on the cover-up network. The new documents gave her access to archives previously sealed under the pretext of facility restructuring, including the B2 basement. Though officials claimed the door had been unused for 7 years, Selena knew some things never leave the system. They are only hidden from view. Early one morning, Selena, Tasha, and Luis, dressed in plain clothes to avoid attention, approached the dusty metal door without fingerprint scanners or facial recognition. The old security codes were destroyed. Luis suggested combining codes from personal oversight and data auditing departments, using an access card from a former technician. After manually reconnecting the reader, the heavy mechanical door opened. Inside, paper documents were neatly lined along the walls, some still sealed, with no computers or network access. The space felt deliberately preserved to be forgotten. Tasha immediately shone a flashlight on faded labels. Many boxes were marked "Suspended processing, no system update required." Luis found a box labeled A344 inside a rusted locked cabinet. It contained reports on Aaron Malay, an East Docks worker who died after police intercepted his documents without a search warrant. The officers claimed no ID was found, but a letter proving Aaron's legal employment was in his pocket. Selena saw no internal investigation order, no post-mortem processing, and no notifications sent to the department or media. This case had never existed in electronic records. She marked it and continued. Tasha read aloud, repeated closing reasons. Insufficient grounds for investigation. Victim's information unverifiable. Suspended due to conflicting secondary sources. Most victims were people of color, immigrants, or had no family confirmation. Who's processed 5 other files, finding 32 cases never entered in the official digital system. Among them, 5 deaths occurred at the scene, none with federal investigation codes or media mentions. Selena realized she was uncovering a deeper system that allowed silence to mask inconvenient truths. She cataloged everything, requested urgent digitization, and planned to compare it with public reports. The question remained if anyone had entered this archive in 7 years, or if they were the first. Tasha cross-checked names from death files with the city registry. All were labeled as accidental with unknown cause or no criminal processing, with no prosecutions or public recognition. Louise found a note stating cases were reported internally but discouraged from disclosure due to vulnerable family situations, effectively erasing these lives from the record. One victim, Malik Rowe, 17, was arrested after running a red light on a bike. He was held for 3 days without a lawyer or family notification. His detention record conflicted with forensic timelines and his cause of death certificate was missing. His death was listed under undetermined blunt trauma and vanished from the system. Another victim, Diane Keller, 36, was handcuffed improperly during a suspicious behavior arrest, lost consciousness in transit, and died at the hospital an hour later. No warrants or footage existed, and family complaints were dismissed, citing undisclosed medical history. Raymond Pike, a part-time repairman, died after a license check. Police claimed he fell while fleeing, but recordings showed he was pinned down while protesting. The forensic report noted a fractured neck from an unusual fall. Henry Alston and Jamal Green were arrested during a community check, held separately, and died 2 days apart. Though documents noted psychological disorders, no psychiatrist had confirmed this, and jail cameras were disabled for maintenance. Selena pinned photos of the 5 victims on a whiteboard with cold notes. No legal representation. No direct witnesses, no accountability pursued. These were people once living ordinary lives, now erased to mere error codes in an administrative system. Louise silently pulled up a chair for Tasha. The 3 stood in the cold room, staring at the list now uncovered, not hidden anymore. No orders or speeches were needed, only heavy silence. A silent promise that some truths, if not revealed, remain forever lost in a system built to forget. Selena submitted a detailed investigative report to the federal inspector's office, including extensive evidence of organized misconduct. The 143-page document compiled sealed archive data, audio recordings, witness confirmations, and diagrams of the internal cover-up network she and her team had reconstructed. Within 48 hours, Roy Hanley was arrested by a federal task force. Silent during his handcuffing, he faced charges of evidence destruction, record manipulation, and obstruction of justice. This marked the first prosecution of a senior inspector by the system he once controlled in nearly 2 decades. Brian Mitchell was charged in city court with assault without cause, abuse of power, and insulting a superior officer. The court presented video footage from the park where Selena had been threatened, and Mitchell's reaction upon recognizing her confirmed his guilt. Previously suppressed complaints and disciplinary records were reopened. Media coverage and social media buzz amplified public attention, but this time the system's silence broke. Grace, once dismissed as an unreliable witness, was invited to testify at a statewide judicial reform hearing. She recounted a decade of silently recording incidents with her old tape recorder. Her status as an independent volunteer witness was restored, accompanied by a commendation from the Civilian Oversight Committee. The press called her the unnamed gatekeeper. Luis, the intern who had remained silent during Selena's threats, returned officially to the police academy with an honorary Department of Justice scholarship. His record noted participation in uncovering systematic violations. Luis was selected to teach ethics oversight and assess psychological responses in community dialogues. Once silent, he now helped train those unwilling to remain silent. The manipulation network unraveled rapidly. 3 officials linked to concealed cases quietly retired within a week. Another was suspended pending investigation. The city police came under special 18-month supervision, including full audits of complaint handling, body cameras, and an independent inspection team. The media described this as the largest sweep in state law enforcement history. Selena avoided the press, dedicating her time to reform work. Former victims sent handwritten letters, all beginning, "I thought I had been forgotten." Now they were remembered by name, truth, and justice, thanks to Selena and those who remained steadfast. The police academy graduation took place at the city square, once a protest site. Selena, invited as an honored guest, made her first public appearance since the investigation. The ceremony was calm and solemn, with family, media, and oversight representatives present. Grace, Tasha, Luis, and former victims occupied front seats. When Selena's name was called, applause rose slowly, echoing years of silence. She carried not pride, but the weight of erased voices. Introduced as the statewide law enforcement reform coordinator, the title embodied all she had achieved. Before the microphone, she spoke without notes, recounting her rookie day, called by the wrong name, given unwanted tasks, and taught that silence is part of growing up in this profession. She then declared, "Sometimes silence is why the system cannot grow." Her gaze invited reflection. Look straight at the person before you, at wrongdoing, and at yourself. Never bow your head when truth stands before you. The room fell into a silence deeper than applause. Luis tightened his badge, Tasha wrote every word, and Grace closed her eyes, holding every sound. Afterward, Selena paused by a photo exhibition behind the hall. A new frame showed her, Grace, and Isaiah at a private press conference where the erased case was officially acknowledged. The caption read, "Voices once forgotten, now heard." She touched the frame gently, as if reviving a memory. Later, in the reform office, Selena opened a new file titled Community Dialogue Group Batch I. It listed young officials volunteering to build oversight standards. Luis Ramirez led, followed by 3 others who once remained silent but now served as internal reviewers. At the bottom, Selena's note read, "Let this be the first time, not the last. We truly hear each other." Thus began a new journey, not of one voice, but many, standing strong amid the storm. Have you ever been misjudged simply because someone didn't understand who you are? Have you ever been underestimated, only to quietly prove you're more capable than they imagined? If you felt that way, know this: you're not alone. And if this story made you reflect, share it so others can learn from it too. Let stories like this be more than emotion. Let them spark change. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about justice, courage, and how one person can force an entire system to look in the mirror.